guys, now we are going to go ahead and render this sequence out in Arnold. And what that means is, I mean, you guys know about rendering where you just take everything in the scene and you process it into a still image. But what we're doing now is we're going to do that, but we're going to do it for every frame in our timeline, and there's going to have a big sequence of images that will play in order, just like animation, if you were doing hand-drawn animation. So what we'll do is we will go ahead and look in our render settings, and there's a few things that we have to set up in here. So we'll look under the Common tab, and the first thing is to make sure that it's going into the right folder, which is going to be your images folder. So what we'll do is, and you just check that right there, we're going to call this out. This one is the second bouncing ball, so that's what I'm going to call it, bouncing ball 2. Just like that. That's really terrible spelling, isn't it? Look at that. There we go. And then I am going to use a PNG for this one. Typically, if you're rendering with the software renderer, you'd probably use a Targa or something like that. PNGs will work too, though. They're really good images. They're not very compressed, so they're really high quality. You can get an alpha channel on there if you need to. So PNG will be good. And then here, we need to change this frame/animation extension. And we need to change it to this one down here, name_number.extension. So let me talk to you about this just for a second. So what's going to happen is you're going to set this off to render, and it's going to process all these images. This is going to decide how to name them and to make sure that they're numbered in order, because that's really important when you go and take the image sequence and try to play it back in like a video editor or something like that. So you're going to have the name, which in our case is going to be bouncing ball 2, an underscore, and then a number of the frame, which is just going to correspond with the numbers of the frames down here, and then a dot and the extension, which in our case is going to be PNG. So that's what that means. But you definitely need to choose this one, because see how our title here has a number at the end. If I were to just let that go right into the number of the extension, that's going to interfere with the numbering, and it's going to make it be off, and it won't work right whenever you go try to use it in the video editor. So this is always the one, name_number.extension. That's the one you choose right there. Frame padding doesn't really matter. It's set to default at 4, so that's just going to mean there's going to be 4 digits in your numbers, this little number right here. So like the first image is going to be called bouncing ball 2 _0001 and then .png. So if you want to turn that down, you can. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. So here is a really important one, the start and the end frame. This is going to determine how much of this timeline we're going to render. So you definitely want to start at 1 right here, and then I'm going to render to 137. So I'm just going to put in 137 right here. Yours might be different if your timing is a little bit different than mine, but I am going to just render 137. And then by frame, I'm going to set it to 1 because it's going to render every single frame. If you wanted to render on 2s, then you'd put a 2 there, and it'd be every other one. That's how that works. And then you want to make sure I'm looking through the perspective camera right now. So you want to make sure that your renderable camera is your perspective camera. Make sure that this is set to HD 720. And that is all set up and everything, so that's good. So now there's another thing that we need to check if we're rendering in Arnold. I'm going to come up to my Arnold menu and go to the render view and give that a second for it to come up. And then you need to make sure that this camera is also set to the camera that you're rendering from, which is the perspective camera, because the render is going to go through this in order to get to your image sequence. It'll render out of here and then save automatically. That's how it's going to work. So let's go ahead and start this up now. So I'm gonna actually just leave this open. I don't even know if I actually need to. Let me just see. I'm going to change over to my rendering menu set. Go down where it says render. And render sequence, it's a green one. That's because it's an Arnold thing and it's new. I'm going to go to my option box. Everything in here should probably be okay. And then I'm going to click render sequence. And yeah, it's going to open up and it's just going to start rendering. And what I'm going to do now is just pause this and let this render, and then we'll come back to the video in a second. Okay, so now we're back to this here. It's all finished rendering and everything. You can tell right here this render time, it says 8 seconds per frame. And this is something that you do have to consider when you're rendering, is that took 8 seconds per frame. That's 137 frames. So it took about almost 20 minutes for this to render. And it's a pretty light scene. It's just got a couple lights and a ball and a floor. So you definitely want to make sure that you're leaving time for rendering when you're doing all of your work. And a good way to sort of plan for that is to just check this render time right here and just multiply that number by the number of frames. So that's how you can calculate your render time, because it can get really, really long sometimes. So we've got everything all rendered. Let me just show you what we have. I'm going to go into my folder here, into my images folder, and this is our list of images right here. So I've got, you know, we were doing the testing earlier. Actually, that's nothing to do with this. That's okay. I'll just edit that out maybe, or not. I don't know. Anyway, so this is our sequence right here. This is our sort of stack of drawings that we would use if this was animation. And you can see how it's numbered. We've got the title, Bouncing Ball 2. We've got the underscore. We've got the number with that 4 frame padding right there, and then the PNG. So that's what we were doing when we were setting all of that stuff up earlier, is making sure that we had it set up for this right here. So, but really all this is just a big stack of images. Let me go ahead and show you how you can go ahead and play this and preview it and just see what it looks like. You're going to use a program called FCheck. So I'm going to come down here into my search and type FCheck. And that's this right here. This is a little program that ships with Maya, and it's just a little playback program. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up and come over here to File, down to Open Animation. This is really important because if you just go to Open Image, it's just going to open the first image. So go to Open Animation, and then you're going to find your animation here. Let me see, where's my, there we go, Images, and then you'll just select the first one, because you've chosen Open Animation, so it knows it's a sequence. Select the first one, click Open, and give it a second, and then it'll play through a little bit weirdly the first time, because it's got to load all the images into the FCheck program. But then the second time it should play through at normal speed. And you can see exactly what your bouncing ball animation looks like rendered. And there it is. So that's how you can do a little bit of a playback. I'm going to show you how to make this into an actual video in just a second, but that's how you can just preview what you've done after rendering. And then it'll just keep playing on a loop. And that's FCheck. That's another little software that you'll have to use while you're working. One other thing I wanted to just quickly point out to you, and this is something that's optional that you can do, but if you go over here, I'm pretty sure it's under Arnold. Yeah, the Arnold renderer. Here where it says motion blur, you can enable motion blur. And what that does is that if you have any fast movement where there's a lot of change from one keyframe to the next, kind of like at the bottom of your bounces where you've got the squash and stretch and everything's moving real fast, if you turn this on, what will happen is the frames will sort of blend into each other. They'll blur into each other a little bit, and it'll play more smoothly. It will start cranking up your render time though, so you have to be careful about that. But it's definitely something that I encourage you to check out and see what it looks like. And if you like those results better, then that's what you can turn into me. That's cool too. So next thing that we need to do is we need to talk about how we are going to take this image sequence and make it into a video that we can use and play back to our friends and whatever, or edit it into something else. And what the program that we're going to use for that is called Premiere, Adobe Premiere. So let me go ahead and launch this, and it's going to take a minute, so just be a little patient because Adobe likes to take its time launching things. But yeah, it's really important that you are calculating your render time ahead of time before the due date, so you leave enough time to do it, because as soon as you start having anything like transparency or anything that's reflective, or you have to do, maybe you're doing depth of field or bokeh or volume scattering, anything that's going to start making your render time be higher, it's going to just be multiplied by the number of frames in your scene. And you're going to have a lot of frames because 24 frames per second. So just make sure that you're keeping that in mind. So you've opened Adobe Premiere. What you'll do is just say New Project. And then you can save this. I guess I'll just go ahead and save it into my folder. I'm going to call this Bouncing Ball 2. And I'm terrible with the spelling again. Look at that. Look at the terrible spelling. It's a good thing I don't teach English. Just saying. All right, and then I'll just throw this just in the top of my project here, just right down here. That'll be fine. Let me actually back up and just say select this folder, and that's where it's going to go. And then I'll say OK. And then wait for a second for the workspace to load up, because sometimes it takes a couple minutes for that too. Sometimes more than a couple minutes. And then here is the workspace. So we can talk about Premiere a little bit more in depth later on when we're doing storyboard animatics and things like that. But basically what you want to do is come up here to File, and you're going to go to Import, because we're going to bring that image sequence into Premiere and export it as an AVI or an MP4, probably an MP4. So I'm going to go find my image sequence. I'm going to select just this first one. That's all I need to select. But you got to make sure to check this box on image sequence, and that tells Premiere that each one of these pictures that are numbered in order is going to be one frame of the animation. Now this is why it's really important that you're paying attention to whether you've skipped frames or if it's not numbered correctly, or there's any kind of interruption in this numbering sequence, because Premiere will just go up to wherever it skips, and then that'll just be your sequence. So sometimes that's happened where you sort of dropped a frame or whatever and then try to import it into Premiere, and then only half your sequence comes in because there's a little skip in the numbering right here. So you just got to make sure that this is very sort of solid all the way through, and then Premiere will know that yes, this is, and they'll just treat it like video. Every frame is a frame in the timeline. So I'll go ahead and say Open, and then it will just drop right down here in my project, Bouncing Ball right here. And you can even see it sort of playing right there. I'll just take this and drag it over into my timeline. Sometimes that'll take a second too, and then if you hit enter, it will just play. So that's a little preview too. Sometimes this preview window doesn't really act right. It's a little bit like the preview or the viewport in Maya. Sometimes it doesn't play exactly how you want, but it's a good sort of start of an indication. So then you're going to come up to File, go down to Export Media, and that will open another window. It's called the Export Settings window. And the few things that you're going to set up, you're going to set the format to H.264. That's this one right here. And then that's really all you have to do to change anything here. That's really the big change. And what that'll do is it'll give us a nice, really high quality MP4 that doesn't take up too much space, but will still look good and play smoothly and all that stuff. So then your output name, I'm going to click that, and this is where you're going to save it to somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and save it into my movies folder, and I'm going to call it Bouncing Ball 2 Render. That's what I'm going to call it. You call it whatever you want, just as long as it makes sense when I go and try to grade it. Then I'll say save right there, and then click export. And then we'll have to just wait a little bit for it to export everything. Sometimes that takes a long time because it depends on how long your sequence is. But then if I come out here to my movies folder, you can see I have my Play Blast AVI, and then I also have this MP4 that I've rendered that will play in the movie player. And that's how you create video out of your keyframes in Maya. It's pretty simple, really, as long as you just keep a few things in mind and make sure that everything's going to work correctly in terms of like numbering and all of that. That's rendering. So that's it for this tutorial, and I will see you guys later. Bye.